Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. I was walking down the street the other day.
Oh, yeah?
And I saw this guy, straight up littering. Just threw his coffee cup right on the sidewalk.
Oh, wow.
It was wild.
Really? What did you do? Did you say something?
I was so tempted.
Yeah.
But then I thought, well, maybe he's just having a rough day,
Right.
Maybe he lost his job or his dog ran away.
Yeah.
Or maybe he's just a jerk.
Could be.
Who knows?
I never know what's going on in someone's head. But it does make you think about fairness, right? Is it fair for one person to just trash the environment while everyone else is trying to, keep things clean?
Exactly. And that brings us to today's deep dive.
Ooh.
Social justice.
Okay.
Is it a real thing?
All right.
Or just some idealistic concept that'll never actually work in the real world?
Well, it's a loaded question, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
The idea of a perfectly just and equitable society is definitely appealing.
Yeah.
But is it achievable?
Right.
And what are the trade-offs?
Right. Does striving for social justice actually mean taking away freedom from others? Does it stifle individual initiative? Is it all just a slippery slope to some kind of Orwellian dystopia?
Whoa. Hold on there.
Uh-huh.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
Before we dive into all the potential pitfalls and conspiracy theories, maybe we should start with a basic understanding of what social justice actually is.
Okay, fair enough. Back to basics.
Yeah.
So what is social justice? Is it just a fancy way of saying be nice to each other?
Well, it's a bit more complex than that. The simplest definition I've come across is that it's about ensuring a fair distribution of responsibilities, social status, and resources.
Okay, responsibilities like everyone doing their part, paying their taxes, not littering. Got it.
Yeah.
But what about social status? What does that even mean?
It's about recognizing that everyone deserves respect and dignity regardless of their background, their job, their social standing. Like that guy who cut you off at the grocery store with all the cereal.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe he's a neurosurgeon saving lives when he's not stockpiling Fruity Pebbles. You don't know.
Uh-huh. True. You can't judge a book by its cereal box. So everyone deserves respect, even cereal hoarders. Got it. But what about resources? Isn't that where things get tricky?
Yeah, resources are definitely at the heart of a lot of debates around social justice. Think about things like healthcare education, access to clean water, even opportunities to succeed. The idea is that everyone should have a fair chance to access these resources regardless of their background or circumstances.
Okay, so equal access to resources and opportunities. I can see how that's important. But is it really possible to achieve that in the real world? I mean, the world's kind of a messy, competitive place, right?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is true social justice just a utopian ideal, or can we actually create a world that's fair and equitable for everyone?
Right. Because some people argue that striving for equality actually stifles individual initiative and leads to a kind of nanny state where everyone's reliant on handouts.
And others argue that without social justice, we end up with a society where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the whole system becomes unstable and unsustainable.
So it's like a tug of war between individual freedom and collective responsibility.
Exactly. And figuring out where that balance lies is the key to figuring out if social justice is even possible.
Okay, so we've got our definition of social justice.
Mm-hmm.
But is it actually necessary? Does the world really need it?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Ooh.
And maybe it's time to dive into that debate.
Okay, let's do it.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's get into it.
All right.
So does the world actually need social justice?
I say yes. Without it, society crumbles.
Hold on. I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah.
Isn't it possible to have the thriving society without forcing this idea of social justice on everyone?
I think you're wrong. But let's hear you out. Why do you think social justice isn't necessary?
Well, for starters, I think it's important to remember that people are naturally driven to succeed. We're wired to compete, to innovate, to strive for a better life. And that's what drives progress.
Okay, I'll give you that. Humans are definitely ambitious creatures. But doesn't that ambition sometimes come at the expense of others?
Sure, there will always be winners and losers. But that's just the nature of the game. It's like a sports competition. Someone's got to win. Someone's got to lose.
But what if the game is rigged? What if some people are born with a massive head start while others are starting miles behind the starting line?
Well, that's where personal responsibility comes in. Even if you start with disadvantages, you can still work hard, make smart choices, and achieve success. It might be harder, but it's not impossible.
Okay, I hear you on the personal responsibility thing.
Yeah.
But don't you think it's a bit naive to think that everyone has an equal playing field? What about those systemic barriers that prevent people from reaching their full potential no matter how hard they try?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
But take education, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If you grew up in a poor neighborhood with underfunded schools and limited resources, you're already at a huge disadvantage compared to someone who goes to a fancy private school with all the bells and whistles.
Well, yeah, but there are scholarships and grants and...
Sure, there are exceptions, but those are just Band-Aids on a much deeper problem. And it's not just education, it's healthcare, it's job opportunities, it's access to healthy food, safe housing, the list goes on and on.
I'm not saying those things aren't important, but I still think...
And what about discrimination? People face barriers based on their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, their religion, all sorts of things that are completely out of their control.
I'm not saying those things don't exist, but I think you're overstating.
Look, I'm not saying that individual effort and responsibility are important. They are.
Right.
But you can't just ignore the systemic factors that create and perpetuate inequality. That's where social justice comes in. It's about leveling the playing field, addressing those root causes, and creating a society where everyone has a fair shot at a good life.
Okay, I'm starting to see your point.
Yeah.
But how do we even know if social justice is working? Like, how do we measure its success?
That's a great question, and one we'll be exploring in depth in just a bit. But first, we need to dig a little deeper into those arguments against social justice. Because let's be honest, it's not without its critics.
Right. There are plenty of people who argue that it's all just a bunch of liberal hogwash, that it actually creates more problems than it solves.
Yeah.
So what are some of those arguments, and are they valid?
Well, that's what we're going to unpack next.
Ooh.
Are you ready to dive into the dark side of social justice?
As ready as I'll ever be. Let's do this.
All right. Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that anytime you're talking about large-scale social change, there are going to be unintended consequences. And social justice is no exception.
Okay, so what are some of those unintended consequences? What are the critics saying?
One of the biggest criticisms is that social justice policies can actually lead to more division and resentment rather than unity and harmony.
How so?
Well, think about it. When you start talking about things like affirmative action or reparations, you're essentially pitting different groups against each other.
Like creating a sense of us versus them?
Exactly. And that can lead to a lot of anger and resentment, especially from people who feel like they're being unfairly disadvantaged or punished for the sins of their ancestors.
Yeah, I can see how that can happen. Even if the intention is good, the execution can sometimes backfire and create more division.
Right. And another big criticism is that social justice policies can stifle individual initiative and create a culture of dependency.
Okay, explain that one.
Well, the argument is that if you provide too much assistance to people, they'll become reliant on handouts and lose the motivation to work hard and improve their own lives.
So it's like the old, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime kind of thing.
Exactly. The critics argue that social safety nets and welfare programs can create a disincentive to work, and that people become trapped in a cycle of poverty rather than being empowered to lift themselves out of it.
I see the point. But isn't there a balance to be struck? Like, shouldn't we help those who are truly in need, even if it means some people might take advantage of the system?
That's the tricky part, finding that balance between providing support and fostering self-sufficiency. And it's a debate that's been raging for decades.
Okay, so we've got the potential for increased division and the risk of creating dependency. What else are the critics saying?
Another common argument is that social justice often comes at the expense of individual liberty and freedom.
Okay, that's one I hear a lot, like the whole social justice warriors are trying to control our thoughts and actions kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. The critics argue that in the pursuit of equality, social justice advocates often try to impose their own values and beliefs on others, restricting freedom of speech, thought, and even expression.
So it's like the whole political correctness gone wild argument.
Exactly. They point to things like hate speech laws, restrictions on certain types of humor, and the pressure to conform to certain ideologies as examples of how social justice can stifle individual freedom.
I see the point.
Yeah.
Like, no one wants to live in a world where you can't even tell a joke without fear of being canceled, right?
Right. And it's a legitimate concern. But I think it's important to distinguish between genuine attempts to promote respect and inclusivity and the kind of overzealous censorship that can stifle free expression.
Okay, so finding that balance is key. But even if we can find that sweet spot, isn't there still the issue of who gets to decide what's just and fair? I mean, those seem like pretty subjective concepts, right?
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest challenges with social justice. It's inherently subjective. What one person considers fair and just might be seen as completely unjust by someone else.
Right? Like even the term social justice itself can be pretty loaded.
Exactly. And that can make it really difficult to implement policies or create social change that everyone can agree on.
So it's like a giant ethical quagmire.
Pretty much. And that's why it's so important to have open and honest conversations about these issues, to listen to different perspectives, and to recognize that there are no easy answers.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the potential downsides of social justice. But even with all those concerns, isn't there still a case to be made for its importance?
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to explore next, because for every criticism of social justice, there's a compelling argument for why it's essential for a just and equitable society.
Okay, bring on the counter-arguments. Let's hear why social justice matters.
I think one of the most compelling arguments is that social justice is essential for creating a more stable and harmonious society.
Okay, I can see that. Like a happy society is a just society.
Exactly. When people feel like they're being treated fairly, when they have equal opportunities and access to resources, they're more likely to be content productive and engaged members of society.
Right. So a more just society benefits everyone.
It does.
What else?
Another big argument in favor of social justice is that it's simply the right thing to do.
Okay, but right can be subjective, can it?
True, but I think most people would agree that every human being deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or circumstances. Social justice is about ensuring that everyone has equal rights and opportunities, regardless of their race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, or any other factor that might make them different.
Okay, so it's about upholding those fundamental human rights that we all should have.
Exactly. It's about creating a world where everyone has the chance to reach their full potential, to live a life free from discrimination and oppression, and to contribute to society in a meaningful way.
I like that. It's about empowering people, not holding them back.
Mm.
But some people might argue that social justice is too idealistic, that it's impossible to achieve true equality in the real world.
Sure, it's a challenging goal, and it requires ongoing effort and commitment. But I think it's important to strive for progress, even if perfection is unattainable. And we've seen incredible progress throughout history thanks to the tireless work of social justice advocates who refuse to give up on the dream of a more just and equitable world.
Okay, so it's about pushing for change, even if it's incremental.
Exactly. It's about chipping away at those systems of oppression and inequality bit by bit until we create a world that truly reflects the values of fairness, compassion, and respect for all.
Okay, that's awesome. But let's get back to the real world for a second. How does social justice actually play out in practice? Like, what are some concrete examples of social justice initiatives that are making a difference?
Well, there are countless examples, both big and small. On a global scale, you have organizations like the United Nations working to promote human rights and reduce poverty around the world.
Right. And what about here in the U.S.?
Here in the U.S., you have organizations like the NAACP and the ACLU fighting for racial justice and civil liberties, and groups like Planned Parenthood and the Human Rights Campaign advocating for reproductive rights and LGBTQ plus equality.
So it's a multifaceted movement with a lot of different players working on a lot of different issues.
Exactly. And it's not just about big organizations, it's also about individuals taking action in their own communities. It's about speaking out against injustice, supporting local businesses owned by people from marginalized groups, volunteering at organizations that are making a difference, and even just having those tough conversations with friends and family members about these important issues.
So it's about being an active participant in creating a more just world, both on a personal and a societal level.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in dismantling systems of oppression and creating a world that's fair and equitable for everyone.
Okay, that's a powerful message.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to circle back something you said earlier about unintended consequences. Even if we have the best intentions, is it possible that social justice initiatives could actually do more harm than good in some cases?
That's a great question, and it's one we need to be constantly mindful of. Because anytime you're dealing with complex social issues, there's always the potential for unintended consequences, even when the goal is to create a more just and equitable society.
So how do we mitigate those risks? How do we make sure we're not creating more problems than we're solving?
I think it starts with humility and open-mindedness.
Yeah.
We need to be willing to listen to different perspectives, to consider the potential impacts of our actions, and to adjust our approach as needed.
So it's about being flexible and adaptable, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to these complex challenges.
Exactly. And it's also about being willing to admit when we're wrong, to learn from our mistakes, and to keep striving for progress, even when it's messy and imperfect.
Well said. Okay, so to sum it all up, social justice is about creating a more fair, equitable, and compassionate world for everyone, but it's not without its challenges and potential pitfalls.
Exactly. It's a complex and multifaceted issue, but it's one that's essential to address if we want to create a society that's truly just and sustainable.
And it's a conversation that we all need to be a part of. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of social justice. We hope you learned something new, and we encourage you to keep exploring these important issues and to take action in your own communities. And don't forget to check out YouTube channel Mickytolife for more.
Absolutely.
Deep dives into travel whiskey reviews and more. Until next time.